There you go. Okay. Sashiba Sangi Jodon Sogi Jonama Janju Bado Dani Gazuji Dagi Juji Besu Nangi Dola Benji Sangi Dubajo Sangi Jodon Sogi Jonama Janju Bado Dani Gazuji Dagi Juji Besu Nangi Dola Benji Sangi Dubajo Sangye Jidan Sogi Jonama, Chanchu Badu Dani Gazuji, Dagi Juji Gibe Tsunangi, Dola Benji Sangye Dubasho. Okay. Anybody have questions from last time? If you can remember that far back. Let's see. So this is the Tibetan. There's the English. And I'll just kind of read through where we are in the text. Homage to the youthful Manjushri, homage to the great sage who taught dependent origination, the means by which are eliminated arising and destruction, those whose mind has transcended existence and non-existence and abides no more therein. They realize the meaning of conditioned existence, the profound absence of objectification. First, non-existence, the source of all faults, had already been undone. Now listen to the reasoning that undoes existence itself as well. So, and I think we touched on the third verse too. If things were truly existent as imagined by the childish, what is the reason they've not accepted as liberation with no entity of existence at all? So it's kind of where we stopped. There's a lot to unpack. Right? Nagarjuna is not very simple.
No.
But getting into the second verse a little bit more. So non-existence, the two extremes that are being refuted by Nagarjuna, one is called the non-existence extreme or nihilism, which is that things don't exist, right? They have no existence. And a lot of times I'll hear people attribute that point of view to the Buddhist teachings that everything's like an illusion, for example. And so people will start to say, oh, things don't exist. That's nihilism. That's not at all what Buddha was saying. It's not what he was saying. However, in this text, Nagarjuna is targeting the realists, the Vaibhashika and the Sutra followers who misattributed, they went too far the other way into seeing things as existing inherently. They kind of agree with the higher schools of Buddhist thought and the Madhyamaka, the middle way, in that they agree that you can't say there's an identifiable person because if you break the person down, they have five aggregates, right? Form aggregate, feeling, conception aggregate, formation aggregate, and awareness, consciousness aggregate, the different psychophysical parts of a human being or any being. And so they see that there's no inherent being. Where they differ from Madhyamaka is they see that their view is the aggregates have some self nature to them, which Madhyamaka says, no, how could that be? Particularly Prasangika Madhyamaka. So just to kind of bring this into a real life example, I'm holding in front of me a cup of water. It's very cool, refreshing. However, in the teachings, it says that for a preta being, if they looked at this same object, they'd be seeing like pus and filthy stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then if a god, a divine being, were to look at this same um, contents, they would see divine nectar. So if that's true, then it would mean that our perceptions are in the mind of the beholder, right? Which gets close to a mind only school kind of view. However, in Madhyamaka, the two schools of Madhyamaka, the Vatantrika Madhyamaka and the Prasangika Madhyamaka, um, this Vatantrika Madhyamaka would say, both of them would agree with the Tibetan phrase, tenne tak, which means that there's a basis for ascription, here a blue cup of water, and then tak, the ascription of this is a blue cup of water. So the ascribing mind ascribes a valid designation based on the basis for designation. This Vedantrika Madhyamaka would hold that there must be some essential quality to this basis of ascription for it to become a valid basis to be called a blue cup of water. The Prasangika Madhyamaka would say that the existence of this object is really only the valid designation, blue cup of water. No more than that, right? Where this photographers would say those, there's got to be a little more to it than that. Um, Sermic and Roche used to use an example of the president of the United States when he would talk about this, to try to give a generic image to our mind of what's being talked about. So we have now different people running for that office. There's one of them that could be considered a valid basis because most people concede he won the last election. And based on that, he bears the title President of the United States. The other one claims it was a rigged, it should really be him, but by consensus, most people don't hold that at this point. They might if he wins the next election, right? So, really, both of them, if you break them down, they're human beings like you, like me. They have five skandhas, they have the karma to be born human, and they want that political power for differing reasons, right? And then until they get that consensus and the valid ascription, okay, you're the president, they're not the president. It's only with that ascription from um, common consensus that they could be called the president. That's true of other phenomena as well, right? So that's what's being talked about in a way. But also, the main point is that everything is dependently arisen. Nothing arises without causes, conditions, mental labeling, right? All of those things um, are necessary for something to be called an existence. The extreme of nihilism goes too far. Okay, so since things don't really exist on their own, therefore they don't exist at all. That's going too far. It's cutting the it's cutting the object too deeply. And um, again, what Nagarjuna is refuting is the realists who go too far on the side of existence. And as we talked about last time, from a well-being point of view, that's a better error than nihilism.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because you think,
Oh,
oh, my well-being for my future depends on my karma,
yeah,
and I have to create good karma so I have a good future life.
yeah,
Even if you're projecting that that has self nature to it, still, because you're trying to create virtuous states of mind and you're trying to act with virtue with your mind, with your speech, with your body, you're creating causes for future well-being. Whereas if you're nihilistic and you think, well, nothing matters, there's no karma, there's no past and future lives, you can really mess yourself up big time in terms of your future well-being and your present well-being for that matter. So there is a little bit of a leaning towards the eternalist model of reality um, in terms of virtue, what's virtuous and what's not virtuous. However, for liberation, to get free from the cycle of suffering that we went through last time, we talked about, and we'll go through it more today. To get free of that whole cycle, we have to totally liberate our minds from misapprehending things. We have to get to a correct view of reality and how dependent origination, by its very nature, can only happen because things lack any essential nature. That's the only way it can happen. Um, so, so for the third verse, if things were truly existent as imagined by the childish, what is the reason they're not accepted as liberated with no entity of existence at all? And I'll go to the Tibetan for this. Um, Here, verse 3, it's on your lower left. Um, so, Jitar, um, just as the next word, chipe, is by the childish. Childish in this context are people who, um, it's really a pejorative term for people who hold to a realist point of view or an eternalist point of view in this context. Namtak um, is imagined with your imagination. Shin means similar to an imaginary image of things. Wumbo are entities. I'm sorry, here, Wumbo. Wumbo is a produced thing, something that it can function. For instance, this blue thing is a produced thing, and it can function as a cup for water, right? It can impact it. It was formed by different produced things, and it can influence other produced things, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
By their very nature, a lumpo, an entity or a produced thing, is causal and impermanent. There's that famous argument. Uh, take sound, for example. It's impermanent because it's a produced thing. Has anybody heard that syllogistic argument before? It's part of the logic for showing impermanence. And you have to show three modes. You know,
oh,
you analyze it in three ways. Okay, is sound a produced thing? And if your answer is yes, then that part of the proof is valid.
yeah,
And then the second is if something is a produced thing, is it impermanent?
yeah,
That's a whole other side of the debate.
yeah,
And then the third leg of the debate is if something is permanent, therefore it cannot be a produced thing.
yeah,
Is that true? Right? If all three are true, then it's a true syllogistic argument, right? So lumpo are produced things. Gelte, if, then you're, if it's true, um, in this case, mm, mm, the translation back. Sorry. I want to make sure I tell this to you accurately. So if it's true, um, um, that things have true nature, if it's true, if that's true. Na, dengume, um, that ngume, that thing that does not exist. So if let's say a produced thing like this cup of water, right? Um, if it's true that it exists with self nature to it, then why wouldn't its absence, not existing, right? Not being a thing, um, why wouldn't that constitute liberation?
Oh,
So for instance, these five aggregates that we have, right? If they have self nature to them, and if that's samsara, then why wouldn't the absence of the five aggregates be nirvana? It's kind of a simplistic logic. Gangi by one, um, you do means you wouldn't accept that eventuality to that logic. Um, kuchi chik means for what gucci cheek. What possible reason would they have not to accept that?
oh, the people.
So for the realists, if they're going to say that, yeah, persons don't have self nature because they depend on the five aggregates,
But
five aggregates had true nature, they exist.
yeah,
So why wouldn't their non existence be nirvana?
I don't.
Okay?
Mm.
Anyway, that's what's being bandied about here. Um, in the commentary to this, there's a quote um, from the Buddha. I think that the scripture is mm, the Dasho Tatra Sutra or the Samgita Sutra. And the Buddha says, through precise knowledge of reality and with precise knowledge of the truth, delight disciples. With delight, happiness develops. With mental happiness comes physical ecstasy. With physical ecstasy, bliss is experienced. Through bliss, the mind becomes one pointed. Through one pointed concentration, one understands reality as it is and sees reality as it is. Through understanding and seeing reality as it is, one develops transcendent renunciation. Through renunciation, one grows dispassionate. Through dispassion, one is liberated. So, another quote that's from, let's see, this is the Udana Varga, wherein the body dissolves, cognition stops, sensation departs, intentional actions are eradicated and consciousness subsides. So is that nirvana? Anybody want to answer? When the body stops, consciousness subsides. Is that nirvana?
I would say no, because there's more to the process, as I've been learning. It's on the way, but it's not nirvana.
Isn't it death?
Yes, it's not nirvana. It's just it doesn't have all the components to get there. So
So then there's another verse. Um, he who once had an irrepressible body and an addiction to sensations, with the liberation of his mind, is like a lamp extinguished. Right? That's another quote from the Buddha. Um, the realists take those quotes and they take it. Um, mm, mm, mm. They take it to be real cessation of the aggregates. That means the cessation that leads to nirvana. However, let me get back to Yume Kensei Rinpoche's commentary on it. If things were perceived by ordinary dualistic mind as truly existent, then it follows that those beings would have achieved the state of non-being, which is how they conceive nirvana. Realists hold the unique appearance of objects as their real nature, but Prasanjika see that this is the object of refutation. So this blue cup of water, the realist would say it has characteristics of being blue, of being a cup, of being water. Prasajikas would say that's those concepts about this cup. If they're held as having self nature, are the object to be refuted, right? Where the realist would say, well, those are real qualities of the cup of water. It's a subtle point.
Can you
Well,
repeat that? I'm sorry, can you repeat that? So the Prasangikas wouldn't say that the blue is a characteristic of the cup. They would just say the blue
they would
is,
say it's a characteristic of the cup, but they wouldn't hold that the characteristics of the cup have any self nature to them.
as in not belonging to the cup, or
As
or
not as not existing from their own side. Okay, let's take a scientific point of view. Isn't it true that the color of blue is really a refraction of light from a scientific point of view that our nervous system interprets as the color blue? Anywhere in that, is there inherent blueness to the cup existing without depending on something else? The cup itself, made out of plastic, where was the plastic? Where did that come from? What are the nature? What's the nature of the atoms that make up the cup? The water, um, um, it's made up of different particles as well, right? Are they static or are they constant in the nature of change? If you accept that they're constantly in the nature of change, how are they modified if they exist inherently without depending on something else? So, so the Madhyamaka would see a blue colored cup. There's no conflict with the with the rules of the world. But where they differ is they wouldn't hold it as existing from its own side.
So I'm sorry. So you're refuting the existence of the cup as well as the existence of its characteristics?
No.
Oh, no, no, no. I didn't mean existence. I mean its lack of inherent existence. I mean,
what's being upheld is that the cup and its contents have no inherent existence.
yeah, that's what I meant. The character, you're negating two things. You're negating the inherent existence of the cup as well as the inherent existence of all of its characteristics. Is that right?
Right, right.
Okay.
So the viewpoint of the Madhyamaka is that a valid basis labeled appropriately, that label is really what could be said to exist in a relative way. From an absolute point of view, everything about it lacks self-nature, right? A realist would hold to the qualities of blueness and cupness and the water as being how that's um, defines it as an existence, right? That those things have some nature to them. Whereas a Madhyamaka would say there's no inherent nature to any of it. All right, so
I'm sorry, sorry to go on. So you
yes, sir.
negate first the cup and then its characteristics? I mean, you negate the inherent existence of the cup first and then its characteristics, or do you do it the other way around, or does it not matter?
Um, in that case, you could do it either way, but usually from the bigger picture, what's suggested for trying to get a correct view is to start with the nature of yourself, right? Because that's the most important thing for your own well-being. And it's also a good place to start because it's based on our misapprehension of an inherent self here, like my body or my mind, right? It's based on that our afflictions grow. And so by starting there and seeing the lack of self nature to what we usually apprehend as a self, then we go into that's me, and refuting any self nature to that, and then going into mine. Well, the things we hold as mine, like our aggregates and our environments and so forth, and others. So it's
Um,
usually that's the usual progression of how to meditate on this.
Wilson, I have a question. It, so I'm a little bit naive about this. Is there a type of perception that this is actually called? Like when you fine tune your perception of things, um, when you're refuting, is there um a name for that type of perception? In other words, you being able
Wisdom,
to distinguish it. Wisdom, okay, well, here we go. I'm learning
transcendent
about that.
wisdom. There are a lot of terms for it, but the general in Tibetan, they'll call it yeshe.
Oh, okay, well, I know that word in Tibetan, so I get
Transcendent
it.
wisdom. Um,
Lots of practice, all right.
okay, well, it'll go into it more and more. I find this text is very hard to unpack, and I'm deeply in gratitude to Gume Rinpoche and Art for translating it and unpacking it for us. But you'll see as we go along, it really takes a fine scalpel to different parts of erroneous views. It takes them apart. Okay, so realists and Madhyamaka scholars all agree that ordinary people, they call it So kyo is a Tibetan, ordinary beings who haven't yet reached a state beyond samsara. They both agree they haven't yet reached nirvana. But the way that realists explain that ordinary appearances are correct in holding the essential qualities of, and characteristics of the objects, like the blue cup, for example, and hold that as their real nature. The real nature of the cup is it's blue, it holds water, right? Then the absurd consequence is that ordinary beings would have already achieved nirvana at their destruction. They would have achieved nirvana, right? At the destruction of their ordinary aggregates, for example. And there's an analogy here. When a child sees a reflection in a mirror, they naively think that that reflection is the actual object. There's a person in that mirror, right? It's in there. Similarly, ordinary beings mistakenly perceive their perceptions of objects to be real. That's reality, right? So Chandrakirti quoted a quote from the King of Concentration Sutras. And I think I have it here. Let me see if I can find it. Therefore, the Lord said in the King of Concentration Sutras, the eye, ear, and nose sense consciousnesses are not validating cognitions. The tongue, body, and mental sense consciousness are not validating cognitions either. If these sense faculties were validating cognitions, what would be accomplished by the noble path? Since these sense faculties are not validating cognitions, but naturally stupid and unpredictable, you who desire the path to nirvana accomplish your aim by means of the noble path. In the Lotus of the True Dharma scripture, the Buddha said, all these things are wrongly construed notions. They are not genuine and do not exist as genuine. They do not originate and are not produced. Their reality and origination are wrong constructions. So let's break that down a little bit. In that context, is the Buddha denying karma? What do you think?
No, what you described is karma, you know, wrong views and actions and all that stuff are the things that we make up that become obstructions or afflictions, or even in the good way, attachments where you really feel love and all that kind of stuff. To me, a lot of that is karma that we develop.
Well, this is where the language gets realists confused, because they read that passage and they think, oh, they're denying cause and effect. But that's not what it's doing. What it's doing from a prasangika point of view is denying inherent cause and inherent effect. Prasangika don't disagree in karma. In fact, they say when you have the middle way view, your understanding of karma gets more precise, and you can see how infallible it is and how it works. As long as you hold anything as having its own self nature, then that obstructs your ability to understand how karma works, because that thing would be impervious to any influence other than itself. Whereas that's not the nature of things. Okay, in the Lotus Dharma scripture, the Buddha explained, when one is free from engagement with anything at all, created or uncreated, real or unreal, large, small, or intermediate. Stable, one does not engage with any, quote, female, nor construct any, quote, male. All things being unproduced, inherently unproduced, though sought, will not be found. All these things are absent, uncreated, and unoriginated, eternally void, inert, and at rest. Such is the sphere of engagement of the wise. So the wise are one pointedly absorbed into that realization of the lack of inherent nature of self and phenomena, which by its nature, it too, it too is dependent, right? And by its nature, it's impervious to change. That's the way things always have been and always will be. They lack inherent nature. Okay, so some scholars use the verse by Chandrakirti to say that sense perceptions do not even constitute relative valid cognition. But Jason Kappa counters that statement. What Jason Kappa says is that those perceptions by eye consciousness, nose consciousness, ear consciousness, so forth, they do constitute relative valid cognition, but not absolute valid cognition. All right, so we could say from a relative point of view, hey, here's a blue cup of water. But that's not its absolute nature, right? It's a relative cognition that could be said accurate. Similarly, if you said Joe Biden is the president, by most consensus of the world, that's true. It's not inherent, but for the time being, it's a true statement, unless you disbelieve the last election, right? So, all right. So the essential characteristics of the objects that appear are held by realists, proponents of entities. The Tibetan is Ngumpo Mawa, those who hold entities as having some self-nature, as the real nature of the entities. It is this thought that's being refuted by this verse. It's that thought that entities have some real nature to them, their characteristics. Deniers of any relative truth, the nihilists and holders of real entities, Yutawa, those who hold things as having real natures, of eternalistic views, both cannot transcend or nirvana through their viewpoints. So there's no way, if you have the nihilist view or the eternalist view, that you're going to be able to escape from the cycle of birth and death from the Madhyamaka point of view. Okay, so let's go to the fourth verse. It's over here. I'll go to the English first. One is not freed by existence. One does not transcend samsara by non-existence. It's through understanding existence and non-existence that great beings are liberated. So that's the Prasajika Madhyamaka stance. We'll go to the Tibetan so we can look at that. Okay, it's up in the upper right here. Yupe means existence, by existence. Nampa Midru means you can't become thoroughly liberated by holding to existence. Mepe means nihilistic, non-existence. Things don't exist. Sipa is samsara, the cycle of existence. It means existence. D, this existence. Le min, that doesn't take you from this existence either. It's like saying, I can't hear you, I can't hear you, or something like that. It's very childish, to say, I'm going to transcend this miserable world by pretending it doesn't exist. It will show itself to you. You won't be free from it. Ne, in this case, means real entities, existent entities. Me, non-existence, existence and non-existence. Yong shepe, this is another word for that wisdom. Yeshe. Yong means completely, and shepa means understanding, complete understanding. By understanding completely existence and non-existence, Dagni Chempo, the great beings, Aryas, Arya Bodhisattvas, Arhats, Buddhas, Nambardrul become completely liberated. So it's that wisdom that liberates us when we're able to see things just as they are. You know that epithet for the Buddha, the knower of the world, right? It doesn't say Buddha doesn't see the world, right? It calls him the knower of the world. He sees the world just as it is. So ignorance, last week we looked at the last time we met for this class, we looked at the wheel of cyclic existence, right? Ignorance is this first link. These are called the nidanas, the 12 links of dependent origination. And this is where it starts. It starts in ignorance. There are two types. One is ignorance of relative truths, cause and effect, past and future lives, right? If we don't see that, we don't understand how karma works, we're running blind. We want happiness, but we're making the causes for misery because we don't see that aspect of truth, right? The other aspect of this ignorance is jikta, jikentawa, holding to the aggregates and the worldly phenomena as if they actually exist, right? As if they have an inherent existence. Jikta. And that jikta, if you think about it, that's what happens to us every day. We wake up in the morning, oh, I'm feeling sleepy today, my body's doing this, right? We have this sense of me all the time. And it's defined by our aggregates, right? Which is not, it's not at a relative level a mistaken view to think, oh, this is my body, this is my mind. However, our problem is that we have this, sometimes they're called the closely grasping aggregates, right? Art's going through this in his class for anybody who's following it. He's doing an excellent job breaking down what's meant by the form aggregate, what's the feeling aggregate, and so forth. Our form aggregates, sometimes they're called the appropriated aggregates, right? So where did our bodies come from? Well, we got genetic material from our parents, and it grew why? Consuming material from the mother. And then once we were born outside the mother's womb, then we ate and ate, and the material we ate got interpreted by our biological system into our features. And so everything about our body is borrowed. Right? There's nothing here that we could say is mine um, that we haven't borrowed. We haven't appropriated it. And eventually we're going to have to give it back. That's the part that we don't like, is that all the stuff we've been appropriating and seeing as my body, eventually it's all going to go back into the four great elements of the earth, water, fire, air. And there will be no remainder that we can point to and say, oh, there's Wilson's. There's, right? It's all going back. And so that's true of the other aggregates too. They've been appropriated. Think of our knowledge. Where did it come from? Right? We had lots of people teach us and we observe things. All of it has been kind of accumulated. We hold to that accumulation as an inherent me, but never has it been an inherent me, nor could it ever be. And so that ignorance, as soon as we have that ignorance, it's upon that we create karma. If we could ever free ourselves of that mistaken notion of ourselves and our aggregates, we couldn't technically create karma at that point. Karma starts with ignorance. And so it could be good karma, it could be bad karma, it could be invariable karma, but it all starts with this ignorance. That's the first link here. The second link is karmic formation. A potter making different pots on his wheel, right? As we enter into actions. So back to the text.
I'm sorry, can I?
Yeah.
Sorry. So about the if we understand if we understand that our aggregates and ourselves lack inherent existence, why don't we create karma? We must do actions. So don't all actions have karma related to them?
Actions created by a Arya Bodhisattva or an Arhat or a Buddha are called trinley, enlightened activity.
Oh, so that's a whole different world. Okay. Is
Yeah,
that because
it doesn't come out of self-grasping fear or ignorance or desire, right? That's been transcended. And
is that
so that kind of action comes out of love, compassion, seeing things as they are, and it's not karma.
also because they have pure aggregates?
The purification of the aggregates is an inevitable outcome of the path of wisdom. And so that those purified aggregates of the five Buddha families and the five wisdoms, when they engage in activity, again, it's just a different name. It's called trinley. And so once we have thoroughly in deep meditation been able to see the emptiness of ourselves and our aggregates directly, we enter the path of meditation and we begin purifying layer after layer of mental afflictions until eventually we're completely liberated from any mental affliction.
Meaning you're purifying your aggregates. I mean, right? Or
I would say your continuum.
yeah, okay.
Mental
Thank you.
continuum. And eventually, when you reach, if we're talking the Bodhisattva path of the Bhumis, when you reach the seventh Bhumi, you're able to, at that point, eliminate the last vestiges of your jikta, holding this parasocial assemblage as a self. You're able to eliminate it so it can't come back. And at that point, from the eighth bhumi on, you become a Mahasattva, which is an equivalent in the Hinayana path to an Arhat, somebody who can't suffer anymore because you've cut out the causes of suffering from your continuum. There are still subtle obstacles to knowledge that need to be, because the habit of ignorance, Sarah Rinpoche compared it to, if you keep garlic in a jar and then one day you empty out the jar, there's still that smell of garlic and it lasts for a while, right? And so similarly, even though you've eliminated the core ignorance that's driven your samsara from beginningless time, there's still the subtle obscurations to knowledge that have to be eliminated on the three pure bhumis before you become fully enlightened. Once fully enlightened, then yes, what used to be your ordinary aggregates become manifestations of the five Buddha families, and what used to be your ordinary wisdoms become the five fully enlightened wisdoms of a Buddha, and so forth. It's a slow process, I hear. And even the quick path takes a lot of time and effort. And so anyway, that's kind of let me finish I think I did finish that pretty much. Okay, so that first, let me go back to the picture of the wheel of existence. So that first link of dependent arising are those two types of ignorance: not understanding, not comprehending ultimate nature of things, as well as not understanding the relative level of how karma operates and so forth. So both of those types of ignorance perpetuate samsara and the cycling in and out of birth and death. A person with wrong view, even though they might be moral and do only virtuous things, they're still under the influence of ignorance until they understand what Nagarjuna is talking about and they see it for themselves. That ignorance holding to a real me and mine, that's what feels anger when something threatens it. That's what feels delight when it gains something, right? So our reactions kind of are caused by that mistaken notion, and all the different afflictions come from it. And until we're able to eliminate that mistaken notion, we'll continue to cycle in the wheel. So that leads us to the fifth verse. Go to the English verse. Those who do not see ultimate reality grasp at samsara and nirvana, but those who see ultimate reality possess no pretensions of world and its transcendence. It's interesting, isn't it? That's a kind of revolutionary statement to the realist schools, because they see kind of a concrete nirvana, a concrete samsara. You got to get out of samsara and you got to get to nirvana, right? And so Nagarjuna definitely rocked the boat when he wrote that verse, right? The Tibetan Denyi means those. Matong means not seeing. Jikten, the world, which is a synonym for samsara. Dong and Young and De means nirvana, which literally means transcending suffering or the experience of suffering. Losem are lom is an interesting word. It was translated. It can be translated as presumptive. There's a sense of arrogance and ignorance combined. Um, those who presume that there's really a world and a nirvana existing from their own size. Denyi, so that's one set of that's the realist that this is text is focused toward. Denyi, those Siknam, those seeing ones, Jikten, the world, Danyan and De are, and transcending the world or transcending suffering, Lom Me, they don't have such a presumptive mind. So the ones who actually see how it really is don't presume an inherent nirvana and samsara dichotomy. So when you become enlightened, where will you be? It could happen right where you are, right? You don't have to go to some other realm or some other place, right? It can happen right where you are. And
I
there,
have a question,
yeah,
Wilson. When if you have, I don't want to use my own, but if you were to have what I would consider, or you might consider, a really profound insight, is that getting close to, the wisdom that you want? I mean, it's part of nirvana. You get like a taste of it, even though it's not enduring and it doesn't always, do you know what I mean, have an impact on you forever.
well, I think those things can lead in the direction of it. You know,
Mhm.
when people have kind of cosmic experience or something. It depends, I think, a lot on how people interpret it when things like that arise. Um,
Mhm.
hmm,
Well, I've had, aha moments that have like really changed my perception of myself and the world around me. And I just wondering if there's shades of gray sometimes along the way to nirvana. I
well,
mean, it's not
I would
like
say,
cut and dry, like, okay, here's the line and I made it to nirvana. So,
well, there is one, and there are different meanings to the word nirvana, and we're going to get into that a little bit.
okay.
Um, there is definitely a demarcation between, remember, I said ordinary beings, so Kewo,
Mm-hmm.
which is us until we hit the path of seeing, right? And then once you hit
Okay.
that path of seeing, then you become a different kind of being in this classification
Yeah,
of being.
that I get. But I'm just asking, like along the way, do you get insights to it? Like that
I,
makes any sense.
I think we do. I think
Okay.
we wouldn't continue, right? I think we
That's
do.
true. That's true. That's true. Okay, thank you.
It's okay. I remember when I first met Sarme Kenzer Rinpoche, I had this kind of revolutionary experience as a teenager that was unfortunately drug induced, but it did make me think that the Tibetan Buddhist path was valid because I had an experience of like clear light mind when I was in almost a death state because of my own foolishness. But I went to Sarme Rinpoche and I asked him about it. And I said, is that shunyata? And he listened to my account of what I had experienced very patiently. And then afterwards he said, uh, just follow what I tell you to do. That was his response. And at the time, I was a little disappointed because I wanted some validation that maybe I was, you know, really far along or something like that. And he didn't offer that to me. But his instruction of just listen to me and follow what I'm telling you to do was actually what I needed because it kept me pursuing the teaching he was giving in my meditations. And they deepened and deepened and deepened. And eventually I got to the point where I know I'm on the right path for me. I can't claim any realizations, but I
Oh,
know
no,
I'm
no, yeah. Well, and I guess that's what I'm talking about, the shades of gray along the way. The more you pick up, the more, you know,
yeah, I
if you're
think
heading
so.
in the right direction. I just feel like once in a while, maybe the shade lifts for a little, couple of moments or whatever, and it's like, wow. And then, you don't contain that. I don't contain that
I
for,
don't, I don't think
a
any of it.
long time.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of what keeps people on the path is they try. In fact, I found the opposite too, is people I've met who at one point were all getting path busters about the path, who later just got kind of tired of it and, got distracted by other things. I usually, when I talk to them, I find they don't have those experiences anymore. Whereas people who continue to try get that feedback,
Well,
which
I always just see it also as you have to keep learning. It's not so many layers of what you're learning. I mean, things I learned prior that I go over again. I was like, oh my God, that's what it means. So, I get it. I was just wondering, like the aha, you really see something, but
yeah,
and
and
it's
what
huge, but you can't contain it, forever, all, in your daily life and encountering people and all that kind of stuff.
right. And I certainly wouldn't dismiss those experiences. I think that they're feedback. I think of it as feedback that, okay, I mean, this is valid. What I'm doing is valid and it keeps you going. David Authy posted a comment about how experience and practice influence each other. And I think that's true. And contemplation. And so basically, on the paths leading up to the path of seeing, what,
Hmm.
what we're trying to do is get a correct conceptual understanding of what's being talked about so that eventually with meditation, we can move to a direct experience of it. Sarah McInerney used to compare it to you going to a train station to pick someone up you've never met before. And so somebody gives you a picture of them. And so when you have the picture, as people are getting off the train, you can check the picture until you get the right person, right?
Right.
Similarly, the conceptual understanding that you build on the path as you're studying and practicing eventually prepares you so that as you get closer to actually meeting ultimate nature directly in meditation, you kind of know what's
You
happening.
know it when you see it. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
makes total sense. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
There's another comment. Oh, yeah. And then David commented, it's often two steps forward and two steps back. Um, okay, so the fifth verse. Um, all right, it gets into Jimmy Kensler Rinpoche's commentary gets into some philosophical points that are being addressed here by Nagarjuna. Some argue um, that the Four Noble Truths, the teachings that the Buddha gave on the Four Noble Truths, prove that he didn't teach emptiness. Some realist schools um, will argue that. Um, in other words, like when you recite the Heart Sutra, no path, no attainment, no lack, right? And you start saying those, no, no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path to that sensation. Realists, when they hear that, they think that's heresy, right? That's denying the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, no question, right? And so because they don't understand what's being refuted, they think it's saying that the four truths don't exist at all, which is not what it's saying. To understand the Heart Sutra, you have to. I think I mentioned it last time. There's a word called gotcha, which means the object that's being refuted. And unless you understand the gotcha, you'll get confused as you read the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. You'll start to fall into nihilism or eternalism, right? But when you understand what's being refuted, then you start getting the path and you start getting the wisdom that understands what's being talked about. So Yume Khyentse Rinpoche says that emptiness was not explicitly taught by the Buddha at the time when he was teaching the Four Truths, but it wasn't excluded either. Buddha was not saying there is no emptiness. He was just trying to help the level of the disciples that were coming to him at that time to help show them the path. So this verse counteracts the misunderstanding that the Four Noble Truths were being refuted by saying, but those who see ultimate reality possess no pretensions of the world and its transcendence. Those beings who gain through their thorough realization of being and non-being, free of self-existence, gain liberation. That's what he said in verse 4, right? So that's refuting the idea that the teachings on emptiness refute the Four Noble Truths. Some react by saying that this is tantamount to saying that nirvana and the world don't exist at all. But this is not the case. Instead, it teaches their lack of self nature. That's the gotcha. That's the object being refuted as anything that exists inherently without depending on anything else, right? Anything that's self-existent. The immature believe that the world has, in the Tibetan, it's wrong sempa, which are kind of innate characteristics, real characteristics, and that nirvana must be grasped, but nirvana is not graspable. However, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths to foster renunciation in those disciples. Its meaning can be interpreted. So some impute ideas of self-nature to the Four Truths, but Buddha's intent was to show eventually the way to ultimate truth. And that third truth, the truth of cessation, Buddha was actually teaching that emptiness. That's one level of meaning of nirvana, is emptiness, that things are empty of any self-nature. They were taught in order to bring those disciples to the state of being Aryas, and then that's called Aryan truths. Whereas some realists argue that the Aryan truths is so called because they are truths perceived by the Aryas. You've probably heard that. Anybody heard that? They're called the Four Aryan Truths because they're what Aryas perceive. However, the last two lines of verse 5 show that the Aryas do not cling to the world nor to nirvana. So a realist will therefore say, okay, if there's no samsara or nirvana, what is the meaning of the Four Truths? which leads to this next verse. How are we doing with? Oh, we're almost out of time. I'll just read the verse. Both samsara and nirvana, neither of these two exists. The thorough understanding of cyclic existence, this is referred to as nirvana. So that's Nagarjuna's response to those qualms that realists will put out there. So when he says neither of those two exists, do you think Nagarjuna is saying neither of them is true at all? No. What he's refuting is that sense that they have self-nature to them. But we'll go into this in more depth next time we meet on the 60 verses. Is that okay? Right. This is interesting text. I don't think you'd ever understand it unless you had a commentary. I know I get confused, but thank goodness the commentaries from Jimmy Kensler and Mache, Art, and Chandrakirti, and Yeltsin J, and all those. All right. So, some closing prayers. Saji Bhakti Joche Medanta Virali Jingi Bhakti Sangye Jindo Nanda Jinga Jumba Jo Idanga Urana Mandala Dame Yatayami Gewadi Gewo Kun Sanam Yeje Zozu Jin Sanam Yeje Lejuwe Aba Kun Yedo Basho Janju Zanjo Rimboje All right.
Bye, Wilson.
Enjoy the Super Bowl, or if you're like me, enjoy Art's next classes. Whatever you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson.
Thank you, Wilson. Please live long. Have a great night.
Yay.
You too. Take care.